The article, The South Korean Gender System, LGBTI in the Context of Family, Legal Identity, and the Military, by authors Terry Young-jung Na, Joo-hee Judy Han, and Se-woon Koo. 20 years ago, from the time that the article was written, the LGBTI movement gained momentum in South Korea. The article examines the way that different ideas, religious and secular, affected beliefs and legal systems surrounding LGBTI people in South Korea. The article covers the issues that LGBTI people in South Korea face in terms of family, legal identity, and the military. We'll begin by examining the way that LGBTI people are affected by the familial system in South Korea, as explained in the article. Then we'll move on to the legal system and the way that LGBTI people's freedom is affected by the enforcement of the law. We'll turn to the military system and the way it affects LGBTI people in South Korea. We'll connect the article to other readings from class. Finally, we'll go on to the discussion questions. First, our keywords. The first word is hoju, or the headship system. This is the family register system in South Korea. We'll discuss the ways that this affects LGBTI people in South Korea. The next keyword is kungmin, or national subjects. This will mainly be used in the legal system section. The next keyword is LGBTI. This is the main acronym that the article refers to LGBTQIA+ individuals. In terms of the acronym, it stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex. The use of this acronym in terms of the article is related to issues that the article examines. Let's get started.
Family introduction. In Korean society, the family headship system, or hojuji, is the perfect example of how the institution of the family has long been used as a system of identity registration. Under that system, a person's origin and social standing were determined by the identification of the head of the family, hoju. Furthermore, a person's relationship greatly depended on their gender to the head of the family and where they are in the succession hierarchy. The family headship system, according to Yang Hoyona, is a very created discriminatory system that separates its members in the process of creating family headship succession, marriage connections, and the relationships between parents and children. Family headship succession. In order for the contemporary South Korean state to produce national subjects, also known as hungmin, the family headship system served as a means of producing hungmin in a way that the state approved of, as it was founded on the idea of state control over the family. Here, seniority, being the oldest child or a child born later, gender, male or female, and status, head of the family or related family, are used to categorize and assign meaning to the hungmin. Put differently, the hungmin is a national subject under totalitarianism that is mediated by familial ties. The familial relations registered replaced the family headship system in 2008 as the primary means of legal identification in South Korea. However, family remains essential for forming and validating an individual's identity. The elimination of the family headship system has lessened gender discriminatory aspects of identity registration and the gendered nature of the national citizenship regime. Marriage is considered the principal means of starting a new family, and LGBTI individuals are not allowed to establish legal structures that certify their relationships. This marginalization of same-sex relationships is related to the global debate about equal marriage rights for LGBTI individuals or legislation to acknowledge restricted same-sex relationships. Some people still believe that same-sex relationships are potentially harmful to the country's order and deserve reduced or distinct rights. Marriage rights skeptics suggest acknowledging non-traditional family interactions based on genuine affection and reciprocal care as an alternative to expand the current system to offer inferior and differentiated privileges to same-sex marriages. Relationships between parents and children. South Korea's family system is deeply rooted in antagonistic binary genders, with the belief that having a child and marrying someone of the opposite gender fulfills one's obligations as a kungmin, serving the country. This view is often criticized by homophobics who argue that same-sex couples cannot conceive biological children, contradicting Christian theology's understanding of the natural order of creation. However, the obligation to serve the countries as a kungmin takes precedence in addressing LGBTI rights. In South Korea, there are two types of stigma associated with LGBTI, one being that the stigma of the so-called unfilial person who doesn't carry on the family line, and two, the stigma of the disloyal kungmin who doesn't fulfill his or her obligations as a citizen. Transgender people need to come open with their families to legally change their gender, which requires documents such as parental consent, single status, and proof of no minor child. Marriage connections. In the global context, these situations are quite uncommon. In order to avoid any legal difficulties arising from the gender change while married, some countries that forbid same-sex marriage also require transgender applicants to provide proof of their single status. However, only Japan and South Korea require this, and only South Korea requires parental consent even in cases where the applicant is an adult with full legal capacity to make decisions on their own behalf. The requirement for parental agreement in order to legally change one's gender implies that a person's status within the family still dictates whether they are a man or a woman and if they are eligible to live as such. The South Korean legal identification system defines gender, particularly the role of women, in a discriminatory way by conflating family relationship verification with legal identity verification. As a result, transgender people's efforts to obtain legal gender change are invariably hampered by this current system. Given this background, it is impossible to interpret any gender transition, be it female to male, woman to woman, or vice versa, in a limited sense as a medical or private process of resolving a difference between the physical body and gender identity. It wouldn't be an overstatement to argue that in South Korea at the moment, changing one's gender entails altering one's gender role, which is steadfastly tied to family ties from conception to death, and that this is only possible with the family's head consent. To summarize, in conclusion, applicants frequently discuss how difficult it is for them to navigate the family dynamic in their declarations for legal gender change. They also discuss how the family has either accepted or rejected their gender dysphoria, and how changing their legal gender will allow them to better fit into the system of gendered families already in place. This procedure provides an insightful look into how gender is conceptualized in South Korean society. The fundamental tenet of the South Korean Civil Code is family, and it has a significant impact on the basis of citizenship rights. The view of homosexuality as a danger to the heteronormative family is one of the main issues the gender nonconformity raises for the current legal system.
Legal identity, an examination of the ways that the legal system affects LGBTI people in South Korea. South Korea's legal identification system creates a challenge for LGBTI people. Specifically, it negatively affects those who are transgender. In this section, the article focuses on two topics: the concept of the binary gender and the medicalization of the transgender identity. Although countries such as Australia and Nepal now recognize a third gender, South Korea, like most countries, only has the option to legally identify as either male or female. This poses a challenge to those who are non-binary. Relating to the topic of binary identities, South Korea has a resident registration system that dates to the Joseon period. It is the primary method of identifying one's legal identity. The issue lies with the first digit of this number, as it signifies the sex of the person. The digit 1 is for males and 2 is for females. This poses a challenge for transgender people as a number may not match their gender identity. For example, An individual may not be able to verify their identity during a routine call to their bank because their voice does not match their number. Additionally, this registration does not account for non-binary identities. Moving on, the article questions what role the state should play when a person wants to change their legal gender. To change their gender, the Supreme Court requires a medical diagnosis or evaluation, guarantees by acquaintances, and parental consent. One problem to this requirement concerns parental consent. Many transgender people do not have accepting parents. Many of these people even leave their families to live as their desired gender. Requiring parental consent makes many people unable to change their legal gender. Another problem to the Supreme Court requirements is the medical diagnosis. Medical treatment is necessary in order to change one's legal identity in Korea. However, there are very few accessible medical institutions that deal with gender-affirming care. Additionally, this care is not covered by insurance, so transgender Koreans have to pay out of pocket for extremely expensive hormones and procedures. To summarize, transgender people in Korea are impacted by the binary legal system as well as the medicalization of their identities.
Military. Although this will be mostly covered in the second article this week, part of this article examines the way that gender and sexuality interact with the military in South Korea. South Korea's mandatory military service presents unique challenges for LGBTI people, as the military deems LGBTI people unsuitable for service while shaming those who avoid military service. There are two main focuses in this article: sexuality and sex and gender. First, sexuality. The most prominent issue that the military presents for LGBTI people is the fact that the military criminal law is the only place where homosexuality is explicitly criminalized in South Korea. The law, Article 92-6, criminalizes sex acts between the same gender individuals, even with consent. The law was created under the pretense that it would control military sexual norms, as the military is considered to be a familial institution, and as the 1973 Supreme Court ruling on this article explains, it is important for the sexual health of the military family. This law has been constitutionally challenged multiple times and upheld multiple times, including in 2002 and 2011. There were some questions presented in 2011 as the article is considered vague in terms of the application of the law, but the 2011 ruling also summarized that the law had to be upheld as homosexual acts objectively viewed disgust ordinary people and as an act intended for sexual satisfaction violate decent sexual morality. Most interestingly, the law doesn't solely apply to soldiers who are on active duty. It also applies to soldiers on their own time. This law has been used to prosecute soldiers on leave for their relationships with civilians. Thus, the impact of the law extends beyond the military. On to sex and gender. Military conscription in South Korea requires a physical examination in order to determine a grade for duty. For transgender individuals, this presents an enormous issue. For MTF individuals, male to female, who have undergone legal gender change, which the process was earlier discussed in this presentation, she is assigned grade 5 following a psychological diagnosis of gender identity disorder. It should be noted that this has not changed even with the update to the DSM-5, which has removed this as a disorder. She is then excluded from active duty and instead assigned to civil defense. For FTM individuals, female to male, he is also assigned a grade 5 and exempted from active duty. No physical examination or psychological diagnosis is required, only documentation of his status. Both are assigned to second-tier national duty alongside convicts, orphans, persons of mixed ancestry, naturalized citizens, and those without a middle school diploma. The article does not discuss how this grading system affects non-binary individuals. Military physical examinations also present issues for intersex individuals. Urological examinations are used to determine reproductive capacity, and as the article points out, they mark some bodies as suitable and others as unsuitable. Information such as this serves no purpose for compatibility or military life. It simply regulates bodies and people's genders, and pathologizes and criminalizes those who deviate. On to the connections between the articles we've analyzed in class. The main connection between the articles is found in the other article this week. The last section of this presentation, we analyzed the ways that the military system, military laws, and the mandatory military service affects LGBTI people. The other article this week by Ying Guzhen goes into depth about the ways that the military system specifically affects transgender people. However, interestingly, this article also examines the grading test that the military uses and the ways that some people use it to exempt themselves from service. The article explains that 21.1% of respondents claimed that they would find ways to be exempted from service. This is connected to our article as it explains the ways that the testing system operates and how it disqualifies and discriminates against transgender individuals and intersex individuals. In week 4, we also had mention of an LGBTI person in Song's article about independent living for women. The interviewee talked about the discrimination they faced in the workplace and in society. Our article examines the way that this discrimination comes to be and is enforced, but Song's article connects to the way that these systems play out in everyday life. Last week's article by Han and Chun also examined from a macro level the ways that gender and sexuality affect people's everyday lives. As explained in the article, gender and sexuality work together in shaping people's experience of discrimination and inequality. The article goes on to explain the roles of politics in enforcing gender norms and ideas about sexuality. It connects to our article as our article examines in more detail the ways that political systems and other societal systems affect LGBTI individuals' lives.
Overall, the article makes the case that because LGBTI people are not well visible, South Korean society has not completely protected their rights. It draws attention to the distinct histories, cultures, and geographical locations of the state and social structures of South Korea, which have combined to form a heteronormative gender system. It is imperative to take into account of the South Korean environment while advancing LGBTI rights internationally and to conduct studies and devise plans to comprehend and alter the intricate relationships between the family, the military, and legal identity.
On to discussion questions. Question 1. In the last month, Article 92 was upheld, criminalizing same-sex relations in military service. How do you think this will continue to impact the LGBTI acceptance and other factors mentioned in the article? Family, legal system, etc. Question 2. The perspective of homosexuality as a danger to the heteronormative family is a significant issue that gender nonconformity raises for the legal system. How can this issue be resolved? Question 3. If countries such as Australia and Nepal recognize the third gender, why do you believe South Korea does not? Here are our references and resources, and thank you so much for listening.